The applause was deafening, but it wasn't for me. I stood in Redwood's boardroom, glass walls shining, New York skyline burning like it was clapping too. My heart beat so loud I swore the whole floor could hear it. 17 years of late nights, missed birthdays, skin in the game. This was supposed to be my moment. The launch that proved everything I had built with my own hands. And then, Darren stepped forward. Darren, the CEO's nephew. Darren, who never wrote a single line of code. Who left at 5 sharp while I pulled all-nighters to stop the system from crashing. He smiled that smooth, borrowed smile, and the room exploded in cheers like he had carried Redwood on his back. I froze, my palms slick, throat closing. My name never left the CEO's mouth. Not once. He called Darren, the visionary. The man who delivered a breakthrough. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled, and me, Aaliyah Carter, might as well have been invisible. Humiliation doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's quiet, a silence that settles in your chest until even your own heartbeat hides. I clapped along with them. Mechanical, because what else can you do? You don't stand up in a room full of billion-dollar suits and scream, "That's mine." You stole it. No, you swallow it. You swallow it until it burns holes inside you. Darren looked at me once, just a flicker, but I caught it. He knew I couldn't say a word. This wasn't my room, it was his, by bloodline, and me? I was just the black woman who built the machine but was never meant to stand at the podium. After the speeches, people swarmed him, champagne glasses clinking like church bells. My own mentees, kids I had pulled through the grind, shook his hand like he was some prophet. I forced a smile, my face stretched so tight it hurt. But inside, a storm had already begun. The cruel thing about betrayal is how invisible it is. Nobody else notices, nobody else feels it, it's just you, standing in a crowd that's cheering for the thief. That night, I walked out under a sky that looked too bright for how heavy I felt. Billboards flashed, taxis screamed, people laughed, like the whole city belonged to a different world. A world where credit went to the one who earned it. But not mine, not tonight. And still, beneath the ache, something whispered, "Not broken, not done, just waiting. This is not where your story ends." I didn't see it yet, but the silence in that boardroom wasn't the end of me. It was the spark. The next morning, I walked into the office with a smile so practiced it might as well have been glued on. Aaliyah Carter, the dependable one. The fixer. The woman who never falters. That's the mask they knew. But under it, my chest was tight, mind replaying last night's theft like a broken record. The corridors smelled of burnt coffee and copier ink, ordinary. Grounding. But not today. Today, it was a reminder. How normal the world could look while mine was shifting sideways. I stepped into the boardroom, glass walls. Too bright table, 12 chairs too big for the people who sat in them. They looked at me sharp, eyes weighing me. My pulse thudded so hard the hum of the air conditioning felt like a drumbeat. Richard leaned forward. "Aaliyah, about last night's presentation, care to explain?" The words cut clean. My mask nearly cracked. I swallowed hard. It was a temporary malfunction. The system glitched, but the data is secure. He leaned back, folding his hands like a judge. Temporary? Investors walked out with more questions than answers. We can't afford cracks right now. Cracks. The word landed heavy. I felt like I was the crack. The flaw they wanted to plaster over. Heads around the table nodded. Some pity. Some cold. Their silence pressed harder than Richard's tone. I wanted to scream that I had worked until my body broke. That I had sacrificed dinners, family, sleep, everything. But what came out was, "It won't happen again." The meeting rolled on. My mind didn't. All I could hear was the dismissal in their voices. The way they saw me not as Aaliyah the builder, but Aaliyah the liability. When it ended, I stayed behind. Empty chairs, faint leather scent, my own heartbeat echoing. For the first time in years, I asked myself if I even belonged here. And yet, beneath the doubt, something else stirred. A defiance. If they thought one stumble defined me, they didn't know me. I walked out, heels sharp against the floor, carrying not just their judgment, but something harder. Not collapse, not defeat. A seed of resolve. I lived in a loop, mornings bleeding into midnights. Fueled by coffee that tasted like burnt hope. Screens glowed, alarms screamed, numbers danced like they owned me. My apartment wasn't a home anymore. Just a pit stop, a place to recharge my body before I dragged it back into the war room. But it wasn't the exhaustion that gnawed at me. It was the whispers. In the elevator, in the break room, floating through the halls like smoke. Can she handle it? Richard's already lining up backups. She's brilliant, but emotional. Emotional. That word cut deeper than any bug in the code. Like feeling was weakness. Like the same fire that had carried this project from scraps of an idea to a living machine was suddenly the reason I couldn't lead it. And I knew what they really meant. Not just emotional. Too black, too much, too loud when I should be grateful to even be in the room. One night, past midnight, I sat alone at my desk. The glow of the code blurred until the lines swam together. My head pounded. My chest felt like it was folding in on itself. For a second, I wondered if this was dedication or self-destruction. I leaned back, rubbed my temples, let the silence press in. Outside, the city pulsed. Couples laughed. Music spilled from bars. Taxis honked like church bells. Life was out there, messy and alive. And me? I was chained to a dream that suddenly looked like a cage. And then the words slipped out before I could stop them. I can't keep this up. The sound startled me. My own voice in the empty room. At first it tasted like surrender. Like defeat. But then, it felt like truth. And maybe truth was the only thing that could save me. Days blurred. Coffee burned the back of my throat. My laptop's hum sang me to sleep at 2 a.m. If I slept at all. Every tick of the clock sounded like judgment, not just for the launch. But for me. Tick. 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 At work, the air was sharp with stress. Suits sweated under starched collars. Microwaved lunches stank of desperation. The walls themselves seemed to vibrate with nerves. And always, the eyes, not direct, not constant, but enough to feel the weight of doubt pressing into my skin. I kept my head down. Headphones on, drowning in spreadsheets and code. But whispers seep through cracks. And when you're exhausted, your armor thins. By the third week, their voices became my own. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am too fragile. Too much. One night, in the war room, I just stopped, fingers frozen above the keyboard. Breath shallow. My reflection in the glass looked back hollow-eyed. Jaw clenched. And for once, I didn't push through. I just let the stillness hold me. That's when I saw the city. Lights flickering, cars inching, laughter echoing from somewhere I couldn't reach. The world moved on, breathing, loving, forgiving, and I was here, alone, shackled to a dream that felt like it might devour me whole. I can't keep this up. This time, I whispered it softer, like a confession. It didn't sound like me, the Aaliyah who always pushed harder. Who never broke, but it rang true, and truth, I realized, wasn't weakness, it was freedom. Because beneath the armor, beneath the perfect slides and late nights, was fear. Fear of failing the project. Fear of failing myself. Fear of proving every whisper right, that I didn't belong. That fear had driven me for years. But maybe fear didn't have to be the driver. Maybe it could be the signal. A reminder that I was human. Not a machine. I leaned back, eyes closed, let myself breathe. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight instead of outrunning it. And with that came the smallest shift. A crack, but a crack that let light in. The clock still ticked, but now, I wasn't just running from it. I was listening. The glass slipped from my hand and shattered across my kitchen floor. Sharp, violent, louder than my heartbeat. Shards glittered under the harsh light like frozen stars. I stared at the mess. Chest heaving, fingers trembling. It wasn't the glass I mourned, it was everything it carried. Sleepless nights, the whispers, the weight I'd been pretending not to feel. One fragile thing breaking was all it took to see the truth. I was already cracked. I sank onto the cold tile. The smell of stale coffee clinging to my hoodie. Pulled my knees to my chest. Arms tight, as if I could hold myself together. And then the tears came. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, relentless. Hot streams cutting down my face, carving honesty into my skin. I whispered into the silence, words that barely made it past my lips. I can't do this anymore. The sound of it startled me, not because it was loud, but because it was true. My voice cracked like glass under pressure, thin and trembling, but real. The confession hung in the air, heavier than any boardroom accusation, heavier than every polished lie I had swallowed just to keep my seat at the table. It wasn't about the project alone. It was about the years of biting my tongue, of showing up twice as early and leaving twice as late, of proving myself again and again in spaces that only wanted to take and never give. It was about the weight of always being watched, of holding my breath in rooms that never felt safe, of pretending every bruise on my spirit was just part of the job. The apartment was too still, almost hostile in its quiet. Every sound magnified, the ticking clock on the wall, steady and merciless, the hum of the refrigerator, droning like an endless command, the faint honk of a car below. Impatient, relentless, ordinary sounds, yet they pressed in like accusations. Move faster, work harder, don't stop, don't rest. And yet, I had stopped. Finally. My phone buzzed on the counter, screen flashing with a message from Richard. Update needed by 8 a.m. No delays. The words blurred through my tears. Just another demand stacked on top of the 1,000 before it. Deadlines, updates, deliverables, as if my worth could be measured in bullet points and bottom lines. My hands curled into fists, nails cutting into my palms. But this time, something shifted. For the first time, the fire inside burned hotter than the fear. Not rage. Not revenge. Just fire. Because I realized something sitting on that kitchen floor. They would never stop asking. They would never stop taking. They would keep draining me until there was nothing left but a hollow shell. Smiling for their approval. As long as I stayed silent, I would always be consumed. I wiped my face with the back of my sleeve. Slow, deliberate, my legs trembled as I stood. But I forced them steady. That's when my eyes caught the shards of glass scattered across the floor. Jagged, dangerous, irreparable, yet when the light hit them, they reflected back in ways a whole glass never could. Splintered, but radiant, broken, but brilliant. That's when it hit me. Maybe breaking wasn't the end. Maybe it was the beginning. The thought scared me, yes, but it also stirred something deeper. A pulse of defiance, a whisper of possibility. My chest rose and fell, not with dread, but with a strange, fragile freedom. I didn't know what came next, but I knew this. I couldn't keep living like I was unbreakable, pretending strength while hollowing out inside. So I knelt, piece by piece, gathering the shards. Each fragment slipped cold against the paper towel, sharp enough to remind me I was still alive. My hands shook, then steadied. By the time the last fragment was gone, I wasn't fixed, I wasn't whole, but I was awake. The clock on the wall ticked on, merciless as ever, but now, instead of running from its beat, I felt my own heart answering back. A rhythm. A defiance. A beginning. And though I didn't speak it aloud, I knew. This was the night everything would change. The spotlight burned hotter than the sun. My skin prickled under its glare, sweat pooling at the base of my neck as though the heat was trying to peel me apart. The boardroom wasn't just a room anymore, it was an arena. Polished wood stretched before me like a stage, and every leather chair became a judge's throne. Eyes tracked me with the precision of hawks. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out the faint buzz of the projector and the sterile hum of the AC. This was supposed to be my moment, the unveiling of the system I had built brick by brick, line by line, sacrifice by sacrifice. I had rehearsed every slide, every answer, every possible objection, but the script in front of me was already being rewritten, and I wasn't the author. Damian Redwood stood tall at the head of the table, his navy suit as crisp as the lies spilling from his mouth. He smiled, slow and confident, as if the entire empire was already his inheritance. With a theatrical pause, he gestured toward the screen. Project Helios, he announced, voice smooth as glass, is the future we promised. A tool that will redefine predictive intelligence. My team and I have poured years into perfecting this. And today, we deliver. My breath caught. My team and I, his words sliced. Not because they were loud, but because they erased me without even needing to name me at all. Applause erupted, sharp and thunderous. The sound pounded against my chest. Each clap a hammer driving me further into silence. Colleagues who once crowded my desk now clapped until their palms were red. I wanted to scream, to stand, to rip back the curtain and expose the truth. But my voice wouldn't come. Then came the twist of the knife. A senior executive leaned forward. Brows knit. Impressive work, Damian, but there are rumors about breaches in data handling. Irregularities in oversight. Can you assure us everything was conducted above board? My stomach knotted. I knew what was coming before Damian even opened his mouth. He didn't miss a beat. His eyes flicked toward me. Subtle, sharp, like a blade glinting in the dark. Then he smiled wider. There were challenges, he said smoothly. A member of the project, brilliant. No doubt, sometimes let ambition outpace protocol. We had to intervene. We had to make hard choices. But in the end, Redwood Dynamics is stronger because we hold ourselves to the highest standards. Whispers spread across the table like wildfire, darting from one side of the boardroom to the other. Heads turned, not toward Damian, but toward me. Their stares pinned me down, sharp and merciless, until I felt stripped bare under the weight of judgment I hadn't even been allowed to contest. My mouth opened, but no sound escaped. The words I wanted, needed, stayed locked in my chest, rattling against my ribs. Desperate but trapped, the floor seemed to tilt beneath me. My stomach lurched as if gravity itself had betrayed me, and I gripped the edge of the table, nails digging into the polished wood, trying to anchor myself against the tide of betrayal that threatened to sweep me under. I could hear my own breath, ragged, uneven, loud in my ears. Every inhale caught on shame. Every exhale stung with disbelief. I didn't need them to say the words out loud. They were already there, floating in the air like smoke after a fire. Ambitious, reckless, a liability. No one had to speak them. Their silence was worse than any verdict. Their eyes wrote the sentence on my skin. By the time the meeting ended, the applause had returned, thunderous, relentless, this time for Damian alone. He shook hands with the senior partners, traded smiles like currency, and basked in the glow of a spotlight that was never his to begin with. I watched the scene unfold like an out-of-body experience, like I had slipped into someone else's nightmare. And me? I sat frozen, numb, invisible. My badge still hung around my neck. But I knew, God, I knew, what had just happened. I had been tried, judged, and executed in plain sight. No blood was spilled, no sentence was read, but I walked out of that boardroom carrying the weight of a burial. As the heavy glass door closed behind me, I told myself one thing. A whisper pressed hard against the silence. As much a vow as a prayer. They can erase my name from the slides. They can erase my face from the room. But they can't erase the fire that built it all. Even as my hands shook, even as my chest felt hollow, I knew the story wasn't finished. Not yet. The city lights blurred into streaks as I stumbled down the marble steps of Redwood Tower. I wasn't walking so much as falling forward, one shaky step at a time. My ears still rang with applause that wasn't mine. Each clap echoed long after the sound had died, sharp and mocking, like ghosts of the boardroom chasing me into the night. The cool air should have cleared my head. Instead, it cut like glass against my skin, slicing through my blouse, biting deep. I pulled my jacket tighter. But the chill was more than weather. It was the kind that crawled under your ribs, settled in your chest, and whispered in a voice too familiar, "It's over. You're finished." New York moved around me, oblivious. Taxis blared their horns. Street vendors called out prices. A couple laughed too loudly at something trivial. The city pulsed with life. But every sound felt muffled, distorted, as if I were sealed inside a soundproof box where only my failure existed. By the time I reached Bryant Park, my legs gave out, and I dropped onto a bench at the edge of the lawn. My hands shook as I pressed them against my face. blocking out the blur of neon and headlights. The city's heartbeat thudded around me, car horns, snippets of conversation, the rumble of the subway below, but inside, I was hollow, empty. I replayed the scene over and over again. Damian's smile, slow and poisonous, his words twisting truth into a weapon. The stares boring into me, each one a dagger, my throat tightening, closing, until nothing came out. I thought anger would come. I thought fury would rise. But what I felt was smaller, meaner, shame. Shame is heavy. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It coils itself around your chest, squeezing until breathing feels like sin. It tells you maybe they were right. Maybe you weren't enough. Maybe your brilliance was recklessness dressed up in ambition. Maybe your whole fire was just a spark waiting to burn everything down. I don't know how long I sat there. Minutes? Hours? The city didn't care. Office windows flicked dark one by one. Food carts rattled as they closed up. The air shifted colder, lonelier. Even the night seemed to conspire, pressing me down deeper into the bench, into myself. And then, somewhere between exhaustion and despair, I saw it. Across the park, a kid sat cross-legged on the pavement, surrounded by scraps of cardboard and wires from a cheap robot kit. His fingers were clumsy, his brow furrowed in concentration. But his eyes glowed with that wild hunger I knew too well. The hunger to make something come alive. I couldn't hear him from where I sat, but I could feel it, the silent prayer of every builder. Every dreamer. Please work. Just once. Please. The little robot jerked forward, sputtered, wobbled on its plastic legs, then collapsed. The boy's face broke into laughter. Not bitter, not broken, just pure delight. He scooped the pieces up, adjusted a wire, and started again. No hesitation, no shame. And just like that, the memory hit me. 14 years old, crouched on the oil-stained floor of my father's garage, coaxing life into a tangle of wires and second-hand circuits. My fingers raw, my knees numb, my heart alive, failing, trying, failing again, never stopping. Back then, failure wasn't humiliation. It wasn't proof that I didn't belong. Failure was just the ritual before flight. My lungs expanded for the first time all night. A shaky breath, but real. The shame didn't vanish. It still pressed against my ribs. Cold and cruel, but inside that weight, something stirred. A spark flickered. Small, fragile, but alive. Damian had stolen my stage. He had painted me as reckless. He had slammed the door shut. But sparks have a way of finding cracks. And as I rose from that park bench, legs unsteady but determined, I realized something vital. I wasn't buried. I was only in the dark. And darkness? Darkness is where fire begins. The apartment was barely more than a box with a view of a brick wall. But to me it became a bunker. The blinds stayed closed. The phone stayed off. I moved like a ghost, slipping out only when the streets were half asleep, when the city's breath was soft and forgiving. Nobody noticed me. Nobody cared to. Inside, I surrounded myself with the fragments of who I used to be. Old notebooks with coffee rings. Sketches folded at the corners. Cardboard boxes stuffed with prototypes that smelled faintly of solder and dust. Each thing was an artifact from another life. A time when I believed mistakes were lessons, not evidence used against you. They sat around me like relics in a makeshift shrine. A soldering iron. A spool of copper wire. A stack of handwritten algorithms with margins full of frantic, hopeful scribbles. At first I couldn't touch them. My chest tightened every time I looked. Shame hovered like smoke, sticky, invasive. I'd reach for a schematic and stop. Damian's voice slithering through my head. Reckless. Dangerous. Unfit. It sounded so small and sharp there. Like a pin waiting to pop my confidence. Sometimes I would catch myself whispering the lines my father used to say, "Baby, you'll have to work twice as hard to get half the credit," and I'd laugh hollowly because he wasn't wrong. But the laugh tasted like copper. Then I'd remember the kid in the park. The boy with busted knees and bright eyes who laughed when his toy fell apart. One more try, I'd tell myself. Just one more. That phrase became a mantra. Not for glory, not for revenge, For the kid in the park and for the 14-year-old me crouched on my father's garage floor. Fingers stained with grease and hope. The nights bled together. I soldered until the tips of my fingers blistered and turned hard. I coded until my eyes wanted to close and kept fighting them awake. Half the time things went wrong, circuits fried. Algorithms collapsed. A spark that smelled of burnt plastic and defeat. More than once I hurled a screwdriver across the room and swore I'd quit. I meant it each time in the heat of anger. But quitting felt worse than staying. Quitting felt like confirming the verdict they'd issued without a trial. The city outside breathed and lived and laughed, while I worked in silence. Coffee cups piled up, crumpled evidence of my stubbornness. The hum of a cheap desk fan became my only applause. It kept time with my pulse. Relentless and small. Slowly, painfully, something shifted. It started small. A rhythm returned to my hands. Movement without overthinking. The kind of quiet work that builds itself into momentum. It was like hearing a song you used to know and realizing you still remembered every line. Fingers that had trembled found steadiness. The pulse of creativity trickled back into my bloodstream. Not like a flood, but like blood finding a wound and slowly knitting it closed. Then came the first tiny victories, nothing for headlines. Nothing for LinkedIn. A power flow smoothed out. One rogue algorithm stopped looping. A sensor read stable when before it flickered like it had a mind of its own. Small things. Enough to remind me I wasn't finished. Enough to remind me that craft is a conversation. One where you keep talking back until the machine finally listens. Fear still creeped up. Every hallway footstep made me freeze. Every ping of my inbox made my heart hit my ribs. I half expected an email telling me to stop. To remove myself. To disappear. But the fear turned into fuel. I learned to hide progress like contraband, decoys, encryption, redundant backups, layers upon layers. What I was building ceased to be just a prototype. It became a declaration. I exist. I will be heard. It became a quiet, stubborn act of defiance coded into circuits and solder joints. Weeks blurred. My body thinned from more work and less sleep. My hair was tied back in the same knot every night. My clothes smelled of burnt plastic and coffee. But my eyes sharpened. Where my apartment had felt suffocating, now it thrummed with purpose. Each part one fitted together was a step away from humiliation. A small claim staked back on what was mine. In the quietest hours, when exhaustion made edges blur and reality feel soft, I'd catch myself smiling, not because anything was perfect, far from it, but because the spark had grown. It wasn't fragile anymore. It was heat. It was potential. It was a stubborn ember that would not die. One night I stood back from the cluttered desk. The prototype sat there humming. An uneven, honest breath of its own. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't finished. But it breathed. And in that sound I heard myself breathe back. I realized in that dim, overstuffed room that Damian had taken my stage but he hadn't taken my voice. I was speaking again. Not to the board. Not yet, but to myself. That was enough to keep building. When I powered it on the first full time, the room held its breath with me. Wires spilled like veins across the tabletop. LEDs blinking in nervous sync. The glow from its core felt fragile, like a candle in a wind tunnel. I leaned close. Pulse matched to the tiny lights. The air smelled of metal and the sharp, unmistakable acid of burnt plastic. My fingers hovered over the controls, trembling. Not because I lacked the skill, but because every movement carried the weight of years. What if it failed? What if Damian was right? What if all these nights amounted to smoke and the smell of burnt ambition? I pressed the command. Silence. Then a spark. A surge. The hum deepened. Not perfect but steady enough to feel like a heartbeat. Lights ran across its chassis in patterns I had drawn 100 sleepless times but never seen alive. I exhaled without realizing I'd been holding my breath. The machine moved, awkward, uneven, eager. It stumbled, then corrected. It learned a tiny thing and repeated it. It was imperfect and beautiful in the way only something you build yourself can be. I reached out to touch the casing. Warm, too warm. A warning. Smoke curled, faint and bright, and my chest froze. I lunged, shut it down fast enough to make the cheap fan stutter. The room dropped into a heavy, acrid silence. For a second, Despair wanted to climb back in like a familiar friend. Maybe it was all broken dreams duct taped together. Maybe I was fooling myself. But then I listened. Beneath the smell of burnt circuit boards, beneath the disappointment, there was a sound. Just a soft echo at first, the faint memory of the rhythm it had found. I tasted defeat and something else, stubborn relief. It had lived, if only for a breath. That counted. I sat there in the dark, hands shaking, and smiled like someone who had found a map in the middle of the ocean. Not because the map promised treasure, but because it offered direction. I stood, wiped the grease from my palms, and started making notes. Changes. Tweaks. Safety fail-safes. I wrote down next steps in my own handwriting. The same scrawl that had filled margins in my father's garage all those years ago. Failure was still possible. It would likely visit again. But now failure felt like a step in a process, not a sentence. And somewhere, under the glass and the dust and the city noise, a little fire grew. Not loud, not blinding, quiet, insistent, waiting for the night it would become a blaze. But then, I caught it. That single heartbeat, that single flicker. The proof that this wasn't fantasy. It worked, even if only for a breath. I leaned back in that chair, laughed low into the dark. Not victory, not yet, just stubborn relief. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it lived. And as long as it lived, so did my fight. The walls of that cramped apartment stopped feeling like a cage. They turned into witnesses, witnesses to a vow whispered from my chest. I won't stop. Not this time, not until this machine sings like it was born for the stage. But keeping it to myself? That was the real prison. See, secrets got weight. They press down on your lungs until you can't breathe right. That prototype on my desk, dark, silent, wires coiled tight. It wasn't just a machine anymore. It was confession, and the longer I kept it buried, the louder it screamed inside me. One night in a café, I heard Damian's voice cut through the air, slick as oil. He had a crowd leaning in, drinking up his every word like gospel. Revolution takes vision, he said, slicing the air with his hands. And vision takes courage. Not everyone has that. That word, courage, hit me like it had my name stitched on it. My coffee went cold in my hand. Courage. Was I hiding? Or was I protecting something fragile, not yet ready for the storm? Back in my apartment, shadows stretched long, whispering from the corners. Show them. Prove them wrong. But then another voice, smaller, cracked but real, rose from inside me. What if you fail in front of them? What if the smoke comes again? What if the laughter follows? I closed my eyes. I remembered that boardroom, the whispers, the humiliation that clung to my skin like smoke. That wound hadn't healed. To stand up there again felt like pressing the bruise till it bled. And yet, I remembered that flicker, that heartbeat, the moment life sparked where there was only silence. Proof. So I paced the floor, back and forth, the wood groaning under me like it was tired too. Inside, a war raged. Hide and stay safe, or step into the fire and claim what was mine. Exposure meant ridicule, maybe ruin, but it also meant possibility. Recognition. Redemption. I whispered to the empty room. Am I building this for me? Or for them? The question hung heavy. By the time the city outside fell asleep, I was still on the floor, prototype before me like an altar. My hands didn't touch wires this time. They hovered over choice. And that's when I knew. Sharing it wasn't just about circuits. It was about me, the part of me I'd buried under fear. If I kept hiding, I was already gone. If I risked it, at least I'd still be alive. So no, I didn't decide right then. No big announcement, no fireworks, just me, whispering to the shadows. Soon. Not yet, but soon. And I swear the machine hummed, faint and steady, like it understood. The lights of the auditorium were blinding. Hotter than memory, my palms slick, my breath shallow, my heart pounding like a drumline at halftime. This was the same stage. The stage where I had fallen. The glitch, the whispers, the pity. And now, here I was again. Me and the prototype, covered, waiting. The crowd buzzed, professors in suits, students leaning lazy, Damian in the front row with that smirk sharp as a blade. The cloth over my machine felt like it weighed 100 pounds. I froze. My throat closed. Every bruise from the past rose fresh again. Not this time, I told myself. Not again. I stepped to the mic. Voice cracking, but I forced it steady. This is different. You won't find this in your textbooks. Not in your labs. Not in corporate catalogs. I ripped the cover free. Let the fabric fall like a curtain. Is proof failure was never my ending. It was my beginning. Gasps rippled. The prototype gleamed under stage light. Humming faint, pulsing like a heartbeat. I pressed the switch. For a moment, silence. My stomach sank. Damian's smirk spread wide. And then, life, light, rhythm. The hum deepened. Steady, alive. The room leaned forward, drawn by the breath of something new. I found my voice. Stronger now. What you're seeing isn't just mechanics. It's resilience. This machine don't erase mistakes, it learns from them. Every failure, every crash, every burnt-out wire built this moment. Damian scoffed. So it hums. Big deal. I bent close, whispered to it like I had in the dark. Show them who you are. The lights shifted. Patterns bloomed on the screen behind me, coherent, deliberate. The machine was speaking. The crowd erupted. Professors whispering fast, students holding up phones. Damian's smirk cracked. I lifted my chin. You wanted courage? This is it. Not in applause, not in headlines, but in standing back up when the world calls you finished. In choosing to build anyway. Silence. Heavy. Trembling. Then applause. First scattered. Then swelling. Roaring like a storm. And me? I didn't feel triumph. I felt release. The air finally leaving my chest after too long. I glanced at Damian. He clapped slow, mocking, but behind his eyes was something new. Not dismissal, something closer to fear, or respect. I stepped off that stage knowing this wasn't victory. It was exposure. The world had seen the machine. They had seen me, and once truth is revealed, you can't bury it again. This is just the beginning, I whispered. The machine pulsed in agreement. Out in the night air, I finally breathed. Cool, sharp, real. For so long I thought my worth lived in perfection. Flawless code, seamless presentations, applause that never ends. But standing there, after fire and failure, I knew different. My worth lived in the cracks. In the breaking. In the rise. The nights of silence. The tears no one saw. The shame heavy as chains. They weren't weakness. They were forge. They burned away what was shallow. Left only what was true. So hear me when I say this. Life don't measure us by titles or trophies. It measures us by the choices nobody sees. When you show kindness instead of anger. When you get back up after the world knocks you flat. When you dare to move forward while folks whisper you're done. Failure ain't the end. Failure is proof you tried. Rising again? That's proof you're alive. So take this with you. Your story is not over. Not after the fall. Not after the mistake. Not even after the world turns its back. The page is still waiting. Waiting for you to write what comes next. Because here's the truth. Every ending we face is just a comma. Not a period. That layoff? That heartbreak? That failure? It isn't the final chapter. It's the margin where you decide what gets written next. Your worth is not defined by who accepts you or who rejects you. It's defined by the courage you carry when the room is empty. And the pen is still in your hand. So don't confuse a pause with a finish. The story keeps moving, as long as you keep choosing to turn the page. If this spoke to you, let me know in the comments. What page are you ready to turn next? And if you're ready to write that next chapter, stick with me. We'll write it together. Subscribe, share this with someone who needs it. And remember, your story is still unfolding.